For decades, the official warning has been simple. If you live between Seattle and Portland, you are one of 15 million people told to brace for a single, unimaginable rupture, the legendary big one racing along the Pacific coast. Every map, every plan, every school drill has followed that script. But in late 2025, a stunning discovery shattered that certainty. New ocean floor data now reveals the fault isn't just slipping, it's tearing itself apart as a 5-kilometer thick slab collapses, snapping into fragments beneath the northwest. This isn't a distant theory, it's unfolding right now. What if the danger we've prepared for is just the beginning, and everything we thought we knew about Cascadia is about to be rewritten? Every official hazard map draws a bright red line across the Pacific Northwest, tracing the 1,000-kilometer scar where the Juan de Fuca plate dives beneath North America. Within this boundary, 15 million people, from the heart of Seattle to the suburbs of Portland, live under the shadow of the Cascadia Subduction Zone. City planners have treated the threat as a single catastrophic rupture, the big one. Civil defense drills, evacuation routes, and school safety protocols all follow this script, calculated against one massive earthquake. The latest USGS seismic hazard models define the risk zone as stretching from Cape Mendocino in California to Vancouver Island, with the highest danger mapped directly beneath the Seattle-Tacoma-Bellevue and Portland-Vancouver metro corridors. These two urban areas alone account for nearly 7 million residents, but the true exposure runs far deeper, reaching into every coastal town and inland community within the shaking zone. Evacuation boundaries cut through neighborhoods, separating those with a fighting chance from those left stranded by broken bridges and flooded roads. The official playbook assumes a single rupture, one timeline, one event to prepare for. Yet the population at risk is not just a statistic, it is a living cross-section of the West Coast. Families, schools, hospitals, entire economies, locked in a waiting game against a fault line that, until now, was thought to move in one deadly piece. Long before hazard maps and seismic models, the Pacific Northwest lived through a disaster that left no written record, at least not in English. On a winter night in January 1700, the ground convulsed along the entire Cascadia Subduction Zone. Trees toppled, shorelines fell, and a wall of water raced across the ocean. In Japan, scribes recorded a tsunami without an earthquake, flooding villages and sweeping away boats. Across the Oregon and Washington coasts, a thin sheet of sand buried forests and meadows, later uncovered by scientists as the unmistakable fingerprint of a colossal wave. Radiocarbon dating pins the event to 1700, matching the Japanese accounts to the day. The magnitude was near 9. Entire sections of coastline dropped by 2 meters in minutes. Saltwater surged miles inland, drowning forests that still stand as ghostly stumps today. For centuries, this catastrophe faded into legend. Then paleo-tsunami deposits, coastal tree rings, and oral histories from indigenous communities revealed the truth. Cascadia is not dormant. The last rupture broke the full length of the margin, stretching from California to Vancouver Island. Civil defense plans, building codes, and school drills all trace their logic back to that night. Every official scenario is built on the idea that the next event will look like 1700. One massive singular rupture, a cycle measured in centuries. Yet the sand sheets and drowned forests are more than relics. They are warnings, buried just beneath the surface, waiting for the next chapter to be written. A raw frame from the July 2025 acoustic mapping survey freezes on the screen, a grayscale raster, time-stamped 0813 UTC, with navigation metadata pinned in the corner. The multi-beam echo sounder, tuned to 12 kHz, captured this image from 5 miles beneath the Cascadia Trench. Across the display, a razor-straight reflector slices through the darkness, brighter and more continuous than anything in the surrounding sediment. The ship's log records the moment. Cascadia 25, position locked, ping rate steady at 1.2 seconds, water column corrected for temperature and salinity. A digital clock ticks in the background as the intensity spikes above -10 decibels, an order of magnitude higher than the background noise. Crew members cluster around the console, voices low and uncertain. Someone mutters that it looks like a slab boundary, but the amplitude is off the charts. Another checks the sub-bottom profiler, confirming a planar surface stretching for kilometers, unbroken, at exactly 8,000 meters below sea level. Data packets stream into the ship's archive, each frame tagged with GPS, sound speed profile, and instrument calibration files. There is no room for interpretation here, just numbers, raw pixels, and the unmistakable signature of something massive and unexpected in the deep. The anomaly is not a glitch, it is not a simulation, it is a direct acoustic return, stamped with the ship's own log, verified by independent instruments. In that moment, the official story of a single, locked fault line begins to unravel. The evidence is right there on the screen, undeniable and unfiltered, a slab boundary that should not exist, at a depth where the plate is supposed to be solid and stable. The crew stare at the data, realizing they are witnessing the first proof that the Cascadia fault is not just slipping. It may be tearing open from within. Within hours of the anomaly's detection, the ship's data pipeline jammed with encrypted logs, flagged for restricted transfer under NOAA's strict embargo protocols. Every raw acoustic frame, every sub-bottom profiler return, was swept into a classified archive, sealed from public release until 2029. The processing logs, stamped with UTC timestamps and instrument calibration codes, document the chain of custody, each file routed through the onboard server, mirrored to the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information, and locked behind access keys known only to a handful of federal data managers. On shore, the research team's request for an emergency verification review triggered a bureaucratic standoff. Policy documents surfaced, citing the NOAA Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research Section 4.2, which states that no unvetted seismic data from active hazard zones may be released before peer validation. The lead scientist, Dr. Maya Serrano, defended the embargo in a terse memo, warning that premature disclosure could spark public panic and derail ongoing risk assessments. Her position drew fire from rival seismologists who demanded independent access to the original files. The tension spilled into agency correspondence. Redacted emails reveal a scramble to balance scientific transparency against the threat of misinformation. The embargo's effect was immediate and chilling. Only low-resolution screenshots, degraded to 10-meter pixels, were cleared for press release. High-resolution images, where the slab's internal structure might be unmistakable, remained locked away. Any interpretation, any claim about a 5-kilometer-thick slab snapping into microplates, now hung on provisional evidence. The official story was frozen in place, but behind closed doors, the race to verify or disprove the anomaly had begun. The data blackout forced scientists to debate, speculate, and model, all without access to the full picture. The stakes had never been higher, and the uncertainty itself became the new threat. Beneath the Pacific Northwest, the idea of a single, locked fault gives way to a more complex reality. In the Cascadia Subduction Zone, scientists are watching a slab of the Juan de Fuca plate that is 5 kilometers thick show signs of internal failure. The difference between 5 kilometers and 5 miles is not just a conversion. It is the key to understanding what is happening. The slab itself is 5 kilometers thick, about 3 miles, but the seismic reflector that caught researchers' attention sits at 8 kilometers, 5 miles below the seafloor. This is not a crack at the surface. It is a rupture deep inside the plate, where heat and pressure should keep the rock strong. Yet, tomography slices from labs in Seattle and Santa Cruz reveal a sharp boundary where seismic velocities drop off, suggesting the solid plate is breaking into smaller microplates, each shifting in its own direction. Lab experiments back this up. When oceanic crust is pushed to its limits, it rarely fails as a single piece. Instead, pore fluid pressure builds inside, weakening the rock. Water trapped in tiny cracks acts like a wedge, lowering the slab's strength until it snaps. Not on the outside, but along hidden planes within. The anomaly at 5 miles depth matches this process, a sudden bright seismic reflector more intense and continuous than anything nearby. Dr. Maya Serrano, who leads the mapping effort, calls it a structural failure in real time, a live record of the plate breaking apart beneath the continent. For years, models treated the Cascadia slab as a single mass, locked and loaded for the next big quake. Now evidence points to a fractured, unpredictable system. If microplates are forming, stress once stored for centuries could shift in unexpected ways. Internal weakening, pore fluid embrittlement, and abrupt fragmentation are forcing a new understanding of subduction, with consequences that could accelerate the timeline for the next megathrust event. Skepticism erupted almost instantly, as news of the 5-kilometer-thick slab showing signs of collapse filtered through the scientific community. The debate fractured along familiar lines. Dr. Elliot Matsuo, a lead seismologist at the USGS Pacific Northwest Lab, issued a blunt warning. Not every bright reflector is a death sentence. Matsuo's team pointed to their own models, arguing that slab delamination rather than shattering could easily explain a strong acoustic return at that depth. They suggested a hydrated lens or a thickened sediment package rather than a catastrophic failure might be to blame. Across campus, Professor Laura Chen's tomography lab at the University of Washington released a counter-analysis. Her 2024 velocity model mapped a 30-kilometer wide low-velocity zone beneath the northern segment, which she interpreted as a possible microplate boundary, but not proof of a full slab collapse. Chen's group raised the specter of artifacts. Multi-beam echo sounders, they argued, are notorious for generating false planar features when side lobes reflect off rough trench fill. Without the raw navigation files and beam-forming parameters, any claim about a live rupture remained, in their words, an interpretation, not a fact. The timing of the recent tremor clusters only poured fuel on the fire. Some researchers flagged a series of low-frequency earthquakes, tremors that seemed to ripple just ahead of the mapped anomaly. But others cautioned that episodic tremor and slip events had been recurring every 14 months in Cascadia for decades, with no proven link to deep slab failure. The risk, they warned, was mistaking coincidence for causality. Peer reviewers demanded access to the original acoustic logs. Without them, the probability question hung in the air. Is the slab really tearing open, or is the evidence a trick of the instruments? Even the most advanced geodynamic models split on the answer. Some simulated stress transfer rates that could, in theory, accelerate the countdown to the next magnitude 9 earthquake. Others found the system more stable than ever, with stress dissipating along smaller faults. In the absence of unrestricted data, the scientific community was left with a rift of its own, caught between the haunting possibility of an imminent rupture and the sobering reality that, for now, everything remains a matter of probability, not certainty. The numbers from the Gear Consortium's 2026 model are impossible to ignore. In their scenario, a rupture triggered by a microplate fracture off the Cascadia coast unleashes a tsunami cresting between 10 and 13 meters as it slams into Coquille Bay. That's a wall of water taller than a 3-story building, reaching the shoreline in less than 20 minutes. The model's output for Seattle and Tacoma is just as grim: permanent coastal subsidence of up to 2.5 meters, enough to drop entire neighborhoods below the tide line in a single irreversible event. The Port of Seattle executive summary, redacted but damning, projects $9.4 billion in direct losses if the Duwamish River mouth sinks by even half that amount. Freight terminals would be underwater, bridges impassable, and the city's economic engine stalled for weeks. Inside the Washington State Emergency Management Division, the atmosphere turns from tense to combative. Mark Davis, a former firefighter who now leads the division, faces a decision that cannot wait for peer review. The gear graphics are pinned to the wall, color-coded bands tracing the modeled flood zones. In a closed-door meeting, Davis argues for immediate public warning. He wants evacuation drills rerun, insurance boards briefed, and port authorities on alert. Legal counsel pushes back, warning that releasing preliminary data could send insurance rates soaring and trigger a cascade of lawsuits. The debate is not academic. With 15 million people living above the fault, every hour of delay risks lives. The clash comes to a head at the Emergency Management Steering Committee. 6 officials vote, each weighing the cost of panic against the price of silence. The tally is 4-2 in favor of withholding the gear findings until the data can be independently validated. The official minutes, pried loose by a Freedom of Information Act request, capture the split in stark language: premature speculation versus failure to warn. Davis leaves the meeting with his hands tied, forced to watch as the most alarming numbers are buried beneath a wall of bureaucratic caution. On the ground, the consequences are immediate. Engineers at the Port of Portland, working from restricted summaries, scramble to update their rapid tsunami impact assessments. Their models show a 12-meter wave at the Columbia River mouth, with a 70% chance that 2 major bridges would fail within 6 hours of a microplate-triggered rupture. The public, for now, receives only the old hazard maps and the familiar drill instructions, unaware that the official narrative is crumbling behind closed doors, and that the real danger may be far greater and far closer than anyone has dared to admit. Inside boardrooms and council chambers, the official story of Cascadia's risk is coming under siege. Industry leaders facing mounting pressure have begun to downplay the threat. The National Association of Realtors released a statement assuring the public that historical recurrence intervals suggest a low probability of a near-term megathrust event, pointing to a 2023 industry-funded study that quietly omits any mention of slab collapse. Insurance companies have circulated white papers that deliberately exclude the 5-mile deep reflector from their models, producing loss projections 30% lower than those that factor in the new evidence. In testimony before Congress, shipping lobbyists warned that premature alarm over a speculative microplate could jeopardize trade and freight rates, and they urged policymakers to delay any sweeping changes until the data is fully validated. The message from these sectors is clear: uncertainty is better than panic, and the bottom line must be protected. Yet outside the corridors of commerce, a different kind of leadership is taking shape. Along the coast, tribal councils have moved swiftly, refusing to wait for federal consensus. Chief Kiana Alstrom of the Suquamish tribe convened the Tribal Science Advisory Council, bringing together geoscientists, emergency managers, and knowledge holders. Their sovereign-based Cascadia Resilience Plan draws on both oral history and the latest seismic data. Evacuation routes are being redrawn, not just along highways, but through forests and ancestral trails. Community alerts are now delivered in native languages, and sacred sites are mapped for protection against sudden land subsidence. For the Suquamish and neighboring nations, the memory of the 1700 Great Wave is not a legend. It is a lived warning passed down for generations. Their plan does not wait for embargoes to lift or for peer reviewers to reach consensus. It is built on the conviction that action must come before certainty. The stakes are not abstract. With 15 million people living above a fault line that may be tearing itself apart, the old playbook, one rupture, one timeline, one drill, no longer fits the evidence. The official hazard maps are being challenged by a reality that is messier and more urgent than anyone imagined. The time for passive waiting has passed. Every community, from the heart of Seattle to the smallest coastal village, faces a choice: trust the comfort of outdated models, or adapt to a world where the ground beneath our feet is changing in real time. The next chapter of Cascadia's story will be written not just by scientists or policymakers, but by people willing to act before the shaking starts. Tonight, the ground beneath the Pacific Northwest is not simply shifting, it is fracturing, piece by piece. Scientists are not just updating models, they are racing to understand a fault line that is rewriting the rules in real time. For 15 million people, this is not a distant threat. It is a countdown. The clock is ticking, and the next rupture may come sooner than anyone dares to imagine.